Hi, I'm Monte Khan and welcome to the second part of the Zune HD tutorial. In this part we're going to be texturing and we're going to be setting up our render. So the first thing you should note is I'm not going to be showing the making of the materials. I feel like the way that we're going to do it, which is loading the materials, applying them, and then going through the materials one by one so you can see the settings and why I chose them, will be much easier to understand, as when I'm making my materials I usually make mistakes and tweak a lot. So this will be a whole lot faster. Okay, so go ahead and open up your model that you worked so hard on and go to File right here in Materials and Load Materials. And inside of the Texture folder you should find Materials along with our screen texture and the Zune Illustrator file. Go ahead and load materials.c4d. It's just an empty Cinema 4D file with our materials inside. Okay, so we've got our lightbox, which we're going to be using when we start rendering, our screen material, glass, frosted material, which is for the these side buttons in our Zune logo, our rubber for our back, our black rubber, and the side metal and buttons. The reason these side metal and buttons are two different materials, the side metal is actually a little bit blurry compared to the buttons. And we've got the main metal body and of course chrome. So if you follow the tutorial exactly and set up organized your model the same way I did, then you should be able to follow along exactly the way I'm applying materials. So let's first apply our materials to the front. So go ahead and open up to your front, and for the logo just go ahead and drag our frosted material right on there, and for the button drag the button material. The screen, go ahead and make sure the rest of the model is not visible, and Alt double click to bring our screen up. Okay, so now you can finally see why we modeled the screen the way we did. First off, for the black, just go ahead and assign the buttons material. Now for the screen, here's what we're going to do. First, press C to make our screen editable, then go to select all three elements, go to Objects, Connect. We don't need this anymore. And make sure it's in the first apply our glass material. Okay? And right over here for C1 and C2, apply our screen material and then drag C2. Okay, so you can't really see what's going on inside our material. That's very easy to fix. Okay, just go ahead and delete this material, and we're just gonna work on this one. First of all, set the projection to flat, and we need to scale it. As you're scaling, you can start to see where the seam is. Just to make it a little bit easier, go into colors, make it a layer, layer, go to a shader, gradient, and just make a circular gradient, just so we can see these seams a little bit better. Okay, so first thing we have to do is align it. So offset it on X, and on Y. Okay, and then increase the X length, and then the Y. Okay, and then you can just go ahead and put the screen.psd back in there. Okay, and now when we apply our glass material, make sure the screen material is in front of the glass material, and it's probably a good idea if we flip this normal so it's facing outwards. So go to right click and select reverse normal so that when light bounces, it bounces off of it instead of the back here. Okay, there we go. And now you can see why we modeled it. We have our glass in front of our actual screen, and now when light hits the screen, it reflects off the glass at the same time, showing the screen, which is just 100% diffuse, no specular, no reflection, none of that. All of our reflection will be in our glass material. For me, it tends to give a much more realistic render. Okay. Oops. Let's get rid of that. Bring back our glass material and the rest of our model. Okay. That's it for the screen. Then for the outer ring, just put our metal material on. And that's it for the front. Pretty easy. Let's go to the middle, a little bit more complicated. First off, in the middle inner, we're going to want to put the black rubber material on. And we've got our two selection tags that we made. So for the button, make sure you're in polygon mode, and just to check it, select restore selection. Alright, and apply our buttons material and drag the selection on. Same with the headphones. Click apply restore selection. And okay, seems like we missed a few polygons. So just go to selection, loop selection, and just select these. Then select our polygon selection tag, go to selection, set selection, there we go, and go ahead and apply another black material and the headphone selection tag. Okay. Looking pretty good. For these sides, right here, select the side metals button and go into our button material, and the cylinders and cylinder copies you're going to want to put frosted, a frosted material. Okay, and the extrude NURBS is also going to have the side metal material. Now go into the port, and we've got our extrude NURBS and extrude NURBS copies, which is instances, or you could have just done copies. I just like using instances. And go ahead and apply chrome to both of them. Okay. And lastly, the back. For the back rubber, we have a less render intensive rubber since we're not going to be seeing it as much. Apply it. And for the back, we have to make sure that you have the correct selection tags. Remember, we made our selection tags as we're modeling, so now we can just apply the brushed metal and then the black rubber, and just select this selection tag right here, rubber bottom, and pin it in. And there we go. It's that simple. And for these screws, just select and give it a chrome material. Okay, so let's go ahead and now look at the materials that we've applied. The screen material, again, is just straight diffuse, just color, no reflection, no specular, no bump. We don't want it to reflect on its own. We want the glass in front of it to reflect for it. Okay, we've got our glass material, refraction rate of 1.56, and Fresnel reflectivity all the way up. And it's pretty simple glass, only change the refraction. And we could have done additive, but we can just leave it as is. The frosted material is just almost like the glass material. There's no specular. The color channel is straight white and no refraction. We don't want it refracting anything, especially the Zune logo. And all I did was blur the reflection and turn down the minimum samples, the min and max samples, so that you could get a little bit of a noise. And also, like I said, no specular like on the glass. Okay, let's check out our back rubber material. This is almost like our black rubber material, but the reflections are a little bit more blurred and they're not as strong, and the specular is not as wide. So it gives you a nice diffuse material, a little reflective, and using reflections instead of specular to give us our reflection it just gives a better look, because we can control the glossiness of a material and how much it actually reflects. Okay, then we've got our black rubber. It's much more reflective, 43% mix strength, but it's less blurry. What that does is give a material that's a little bit more coarse, at the same time not as harsh on the reflection. The color is almost black. Again, I don't like using all black. We have 1% brightness, and for the specular, width and height are all the way up. Fall off, I brought down just a little bit, 20%. And the specular color, I added some noise. Let's go ahead and look at that shader. It's Poxo noise at 25% global scale, just to give a little bit of a more contrasty. And I turned the octaves to 8. Okay. Then you've got our side metal material. It's best if we compare it to our buttons material. Everything is almost the same except the side metal is blurred, just to give it a softer feel. Then we've got our brush material. This is a little bit more complex. We have our Fresnel material, Fresnel shader, mid-gray, almost mid-gray, 58%, and then our darker gray so that it's less reflective on the edges. At the same time, we set the mix mode to add and turned the brightness to 15, not 100% white reflection, just a little bit of tinge of red. And of course we blurred it, 7% minimum samples. We don't really need the minimum samples to be that high. I mean, you can turn them up if you want, but I just want a fairly fast render. And the chrome, really simple, white diffuse, reflection 100%, the same Fresnel shader that's in our metal, and no blur, and the specular is really tight, as you can see. Okay, that's basically it, and I'm gonna pause the video and then we can start to look at how we can set up a render. Okay, so let's get started lighting our model. So why do we have this lightbox material? Well, the first thing you should probably do is select the Zune HD materials, go to Function, Add to New Layer, and just rename it Zune HD, just to organize our layers. Okay, so you've got our our lightbox material. So what can we do with it? Well, let me make some new render settings. If you turn on global illumination, make a plane, and at our light box we can actually light with geometry. All of this is coming from our one light source. So how can we use that efficiently? Well, the first thing we have to do is create a backdrop for our material, for our render. So create a sky and make a new material. Take off everything but luminance and make a gradient, 2dv, and we want a slightly purple environment. Let's just tweak it a little bit inside of a layer. Alright, this is, for me, is much easier than tweaking the gradient. I get my base colors, then I just start to play with it inside of a layer. I create a new layer, then add brightness, contrast, gamma, and hue, saturation, lightness effects. And we can just switch them on and off to see what we're doing. Okay, and apply it to our sky. Alright, a little too strong. Maybe change the hue a little bit, make it more blue. Okay, I'm liking this much better. And we don't want it to reflect. We only want our light boxes to reflect off our objects. So go to Cinema 4D, make a new compositing tag, and deselect scene by, or just deselect scene by rays. But make sure scene by GI and scene by camera are still ticked. Okay, so let's start adding some lights. Now we could geometry, rotate it, and start trying to guess how we can line it up with our object. But there is an easier way. Create new geometry, a plane. You can use any shape you want. We'll just be using a plane mostly, and change the orientation to Z+. Get rid of all this extra geometry we don't need. And we're going to make sure that the plane is always staring at our model. So we're going to use a target tag. Right click, Cinema 4D tags, target, and just drag our Zune null object in. And now when we start to move our object around, it'll start to rotate. On its z-axis. Much easier to get the result that we want. Okay, so apply it to our plane, and let's create some test settings. Just switch everything to low, just so we can get a feel for how the scene is being lit. Okay. You can already see it being reflected. Alright, let's say I wanted to get a little bit of a warmer color. Well, we can just control and drag our lightbox material, and rename this lightbox warm, and we can go ahead and make a lightbox cool. For our warm, just change the color, something a little bit more warm, and for the cool, do the exact same with a cooler color. Okay? And there we can already see it getting a little bit warmer on the right side. And as we start to add more geometry, I want to add maybe a grid of lights above it. So we can just create a disk object, expand it, disk segments, bring it down to 1, bring the radius down, and using MoGraph we can create a grid. Alright. Make sure this is on Z. Go to Cinema 4D, Targets, Zune object, and press C to make our cloner object editable. And now all of the disks are looking directly at our Zune HD. We can start to add some alternating tones. And you start to really be able to affect the light inside of your render. Let's put all of these inside their own null object, name it, and let's create a compositing tag where they're not seen by the camera when we render out. Okay, let's see how the scene is lit now. Okay, a little bit too warm, so let's add some plain white light boxes. Again, for something that we want to reflect, it's probably a good idea if it's just plain white. Okay. Let's move it a little bit. Go into our top view. Alright, I'm just trying to get the reflection something a little bit more appealing. That piece right there is what's being reflected. Alright, let's move it just a little bit. Okay, we can actually rotate it. Scale it up. And you can see how powerful the technique is. You can place the lights anywhere, making sure they're all hitting our render, our model. And there you go. I'm happy with the lighting. So now let's go ahead and see, let's move these a little bit higher. So that they're not being reflected. Alright, maybe a little bit too high on my part. It's all about tweaking your lights. Okay. Alright, so now let's look at the render settings that I prepared for the render. We don't really need these anymore. You can go ahead and delete them. So first let's go into output. I'm using the HD TV 16:9 film aspect ratio and 800 pixels wide, so 450 pixels high, and I'm saving it out. And for the anti-aliasing, I selected best. For the filter, still image, instead of the max level being 4, I just left it at 2. We can turn it up if we see that it's not enough. And the most important part of the settings, the global illumination. Let's see. First, for the GI mode, I have both irradiance and quasi Monte Carlo, the 2 bounces, and just to have the secondary bounce just a little bit brighter, I put the intensity up to 125%. And the settings that I changed are the oversampling, which I set to medium, which basically just dictates how Cinema 4D reacts to the light that it samples. And the samples, I did a custom accuracy of 65%, right between our medium and high settings, and it's good enough for what we're going to have. The record density is also custom. Minimum rate of -4, maximum rate of -1, and a minimum radius of 12%. We could do 6, maybe 7%, but we really don't need that small of a minimum radius, and density control of 67%. And lastly, we have smoothing, and I have it set to medium. This basically takes the map, our global illumination map, and blurs it just a little bit so we can get smoother light. Okay, so let's render. Alright, that's looking pretty good. The point of the tutorial is mostly to show you how easy it is to set up your lights using this targeting tag inside of Cinema 4D. I mean, we could add as many lights as we want, move them around, and be confident that Cinema 4D is making sure all of them are lighting our model. It's really that simple. Let me just render region. It's really that simple to light our models, and it's a very powerful technique if you know what you're doing. That's the end of the tutorial. I'm Montague Khan, and I'll see you next time.